The speaking process is something that happens in milliseconds, and it is so instantaneous that some believe that we do it automatically. However, there are some models that explains that not only we don't do it automatically, but it involves much more than we think. The most accepted model that explains the speaking phenomena is the levels model, but it only describes those speakers who talk in their native language. Because of this, Kormos created her speech production and second language acquisition model, which tries to integrate both the processes from both L1 and L2 speakers, and this is the model that I am going to describe on this video. First of all, I must emphasize that to describe this model, I will use the trade-off hypothesis and the task-based performance hypothesis presented by Skehan and Foster later on the video. To start with, Kormos' model consists of three coding components. First, we have the conceptualizer, where the concepts and ideas of a message are activated. After this process, we move on to the formulator. In this process, we start with a subprocess called lexicogrammatical encoding, which is where we associate the conceptualizer ideas to words without grammatical form. After this, we will pass to the morphophonological encoding, where we now begin to give grammatical form to the word. Finally, the last subprocess is phonetic encoding, which is when we remember the sounds and we get ready to speak. After this, we move on to the process called articulator, which is basically the transmission of a message to the receiver. It should be noted that after this process, there is also something called self-monitoring, which is the process in charge of analyzing the message and if it was delivered correctly. This process appears 3 times throughout the model, as we will see later on the video. Finally, when the message is delivered, it will be passed to the receiver, who will decode the message, then start the conversation process all over again. Now, it is necessary to describe how the long-term memory works in this model, which is a fundamental part of it. First of all, we have 3 major memories. Episodic memory is shown as our background knowledge, since it's basically all the memories that shape us. This is related with the conceptualizer, because those memories affect how we will conceive a concept. After this, we have the lexicon, which is divided between 3 sub-processes. The concepts, which also affect the conceptualizer, the lemmas, which affect the lexicogrammatical encoding because it's the storage of words that we have in our memory, and the lexemes, which relate to morphophonological encoding because they are the repository of our syntactic and morphonological characteristics. Following with the memories, we have the syllabary, which is the storage of every sound we know in the chosen language, directly affecting how phonetic encoding will work. However, one of the most important features that makes this model applicable to L2 speakers is the L2 declarative rules. This memory is special as it contains all the knowledge that a speaker has regarding the L2, both grammatical rules, pronunciations, and words as such. This process affects lexicogrammatical encoding and morphophonological encoding as they shape how the concept of a message will be delivered in the chosen language. Since the receptor when decoding also needs to relate the concepts received with this previous knowledge, the long-term memory is shared between the participants of a conversation. It is a good time to mention that this model is linear since the process itself is sequential, so it never goes backward in any of these steps. In this model, Kormos talks about 3 instances on which the speaker monitors his message, which she called the 3 monitor loops. The first monitoring loop occurs in the pre-verbal message, where the message is checked to see if it matches with the speaker's intentions. The second monitoring loop occurs before the articulation process, in the phonetic encoding exactly. The third monitoring loop takes place after articulation, where the final utterance has already been produced. If in any of these 3 controls the speaker finds an error, he or she will start a process where the speaker will return to the conceptualization phase to correct the utterance. Well, now that I have explained the model, I will begin to show you how the model changes with the task-based performance and the trade-off hypothesis. First, I want to show you how the process changes as it is conditioned by the task-based activities. In this hypothesis, it is tested that using certain tasks and planning them can affect the quality of the speaker's production. For example, if we talk about accuracy, most studies show how speakers produce a better score when they have planned to speak correctly. However, studies also show that when speakers focus too much on accuracy, the punctuation on fluency and complexity of speech are lower. Skihan and Foster call this phenomenon the trade-off hypothesis. This hypothesis is based mainly on the fact that attention is selective and limited, so we cannot focus on the three parts of the CAF. However, according to Bui and Huang, there are native speakers who can process in parallel thanks to automatization. Now, I want to show you how the trade-off hypothesis affects the processes on the Kormos model. In the case of complexity, some authors argue that focusing on this aspect can improve complexity and accuracy, but not fluency. According to Garside, this happens because when we want to make use of cognitive complexity, we are also accessing a more sophisticated language, which translates into a more effective use of accuracy. In the model, we can see how this positively affects the lexicogrammatical encoding and the morphophonological encoding. However, it does negatively affect the phonological encoding, which is more related to fluency. For Skihan and Foster, fluency can function correctly with either accuracy and complexity, but never with both at the same time. In other words, by focusing on fluency, the use of more sophisticated words or their correct use are limited. In the model, we can see how improving fluency affects phonetic encoding and the articulator, but depending on the situation, it will also negatively affect lexicogrammatical encoding and morphophonological encoding. In the words of Michael, seeking to improve accuracy in monitoring tasks directly affects fluency. This can be explained by the fact that when thinking about grammatical rules and good language use, speakers tend to hesitate. In the model, focusing on accuracy possibly affects L2 declarative rules and morphophonological encoding, but negatively affects phonological encoding and the articulator. Finally, I would like to evaluate Kormos' model of 5 criteria. First of all, its plausibility. It seems to me really correct because it is based on concrete psychological aspects which she explains on every chapter on her book. Second, when talking about empiricism, although there are not so many studies on this particular model, it is well known that Levels models is one of the most reliable ones, so I would say that this is a good point too. Third, about the parsimony. The model itself is not so intuitive at first, but I do think that the information presented on the model it is concise. Fourth, the predicted values. You can definitely foresee what will happen with the speaker when you see this model, mostly because you can see on which process he or she will be struggling. Finally, the pedagogical applications. I do think this model can be used in class, especially as a self-knowledge tool for students, mostly because when students can see their own cognitive processes working, they can improve their own speaking skills. To sum up, the Kormos model presents the speech process in both L1 and L2 in a clear and simple way, but above all, it shows the process in an efficient way. Having studied about this model, I can clearly understand how my mind works sequentially when speaking. So I personally believe that it will be of a great use to me both as a student and as a future teacher. Goodbye.